Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Oracles of Theleston, Episode 7, Atop Cloudspite Mountain. Today we're going to be talking about Fall Creek. Falkirk? Falkirk? Fall Creek? So it's been called a lot of things, and in fact, when you watch the episode 25 of the Fireside Chats, it seems like each one of them kind of pronounces it their own different way, especially Verde. So there's definitely some variance there, and it's kind of got an interesting story, I'm sure, and we definitely kind of want to know more about that subject. Um, but yeah, it's definitely a very interesting area. If anybody remembers from previous episodes in the watching the firesides, uh, this is where if you follow the river that flows into Tide's End all the way up to its source, it is the crystalline lake below the highest peak of Cloudspite Mountain, which is where Fall Creek has existed, and it sounds like it has always existed to a greater or lesser extent. While it was mentioned that Tide's End is maybe the only one that really like has always been in the same place and has always had someone there over the ages, it seems like Fell Creek is a place that has definitely always had people for the most part. Um, though there's definitely some things that are a little interesting. I think we're going to kind of talk about that, about kind of how it ended up there and, the establishment and all of that sort of thing. And it's a really interesting culture. I know there's definitely some stuff about it that maybe we still want to know a little bit more about. I know Diggs definitely. You've got some concerns about things. In fact, let's just kind of go around clockwise and everybody just kind of say anything what you thought about the Fireside 21. Anything you think about with Fall Creek
25?
25. Did I say 21? 25. And what you folks thought of it, and any kind of general thoughts before we get into the bulk of discussion. So Diggs, why don't you start us off?
I plead the fifth.
All right, all right. How about you, Zero?
Uh, I'm kind of, well, we'll see as we go through this, but it was kind of an interesting one to me just because it's really kind of our first, I guess, heavily decentralized, uh, I guess I don't want to call it a city, but it's the first culture that or group that we've come across where there's a definitive uh, way of life and there's a definitive group of people, but there isn't a really centralized form of government. They're not really ruled over by the synod or by a church specifically. And from what it sounds like, it also sounds like they've not changed um, maybe terribly much since before uh, kind of civilization collapsed and its resurgence. So I don't know. I don't think they're kind of just insular, and we know they get preyed upon by Valor to a certain degree. But it's kind of they stand they stand out as interesting to me mostly because they are they seem very loosely tied together, a strong spiritual connection, but otherwise spread out across this whole river and lake and not uh, building. They haven't tried to build a kind of centralized government, much like, or maybe not, again, maybe not government, but not a centralized structure like we see out of Crowns Rock
Yeah.
or Valor, Tides In, or Skypass rather. So that's
Yeah.
where they kind of stand out to me.
And you're definitely right about they're overwhelmingly rural compared to most of the other cities that, they you're right that there isn't really a centralization that occurred. It was pretty much, well, you need a house there, let's build a house there, and just this kind of these sprawling neighborhoods and, just houses that aren't necessarily connected. Though I wonder if there's any sort of like a postage system or established roads or anything, or if it's really like a wild sort of area. But we'll get to that. And then Paul, I know you had a question. It looks like they already answered it in chat here. So I'll just let you go for
Yeah.
a little bit here.
They did answer it in one sense, but it kind of brings up another. My question had to do with the Fall Creek versus Falkirk. That's quite distinctly different in the pronunciation, and of course the spelling, because we do writing in our culture. Um, but in other languages and in other transliterations, Falkirk would actually be a corrupted church. And I was kind of curious about that, especially in the discussion of the ruins that are east of Cloudspite. So hopefully we'll have a chance to discuss something like that, because I think it's interesting that the people of Fall Creek would call themselves the Falkirk. Um, and on a completely different and more generalized note, I find it actually pretty difficult to not say this is like that. This culture is like something else that I know, and I know that that is something that is really commonly done, and I'm trying to not do that, because that means that I'm projecting what I know about some other culture onto the Falkirk people, and that lore of what they are and who they are and how they came to be. But I am. It is really difficult to not say, well, they're like this, and so. Oh, well, why is that? Is that just slang? Is that local accent?
Fall Creek is a Broggian name for the people derived from their own name. Hmm. So maybe they had always called themselves Falkirk.
The Falkirk, right.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I'm babbling here. But those are somewhere my mind went with all of this. I'm very interested in the historical aspect of it, and I really love the almost completely unstructured life of the Falkirk people, and it sounds very appealing to me.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff that was covered there. Now, one of the things, and you had mentioned a little bit, was the idea that there's a nearby mountain range which looks like it had supported life and civilization at some point, and people could potentially live there, but nobody does anymore. Now I'm going to bring up the map, and I don't know if it's actually on the map or not. Um, yeah, it doesn't really look like they have the depictions of the mountains very well drawn on there, where the actual height elevations are. So we'll definitely need to wait till we see the more official map. But
Well, I'm not sure that we knew. I'm not sure that Eversor, who did this map, knew that there was another mountain range to the east.
right, that might be something that was recently revealed to us, just on that episode in particular. But that they were saying that there's another one. Was it to the east or to the west or to the south? Because they threw out three different directions there, and I'm not 100% sure which one, but somewhere else. I know they were saying like towards the south of Fell Creek. There's some people that had like set up shop in the forests and some of the areas out there, but um, it seems like it's still somewhat associated with Fell Creek. But that there was an entirely different mountain range somewhere across the way, which people did live at. There's some evidence of ruins, including a ruined, I think it was a Nodensian church. And
Yep.
I when we were kind of talking about that, I know you had mentioned the idea. Well, if Falkirk means fallen church, well, are these the people that had lived on this other mountain where the Nodensians and whoever had established, and things went sour there and they went back? It doesn't really seem like the case, though. It seems like um, uh, the cultures of the people of Fall Creek are their own, and it has always been their own, and that they maybe have even tried to do what they can to resist kind of religious and spiritual assimilation, and instead just keep the assimilation with SkyPass as more of a business sort of thing. Now that was one of the interesting things. They had actually talked about Fall Creek having gotten a lot of business with SkyPass, and I guess if the mountain is closer to the west, that would make sense that SkyPass would have access to it. Otherwise, the way it had sounded in previous episodes and the way I kind of understand it is the easiest way to get to Fall Creek is sail into Tide's End and make your way up the paths along the river. But SkyPass apparently helped both Tide's End and Fall Creek, and the way that it was described in the show was that Fall Creek was essentially assimilated by SkyPass, not in all ways, definitely not a takeover of sorts, but it sounds like opening up modern business and access to modern technologies and houseboats and barges and larger boats and that sort of stuff that the people of Fall Creek really didn't have too much. They were more like using canoes and living a little bit more simple. It seems like some of that influence from SkyPass has helped them build up and develop in different ways that they hadn't before. Diggs, did you no? Still got
I'm not
nothing on
saying
that
anything.
one. All right. Sounded like you were gonna say something there. But that's definitely an interesting sort of thing. So, I guess what would the implications of that mean? What are the aspects of SkyPass that we would expect to have kind of been passed along and translated to Fall Creek, and what things did they pick up elsewhere? Did they invent on their own? If anybody has any thoughts on this, go right ahead.
I kind of wonder more just about how they've continued. What is the impact of being a less centralized culture, surrounded by ultimately synod-driven, or at least supported kind of powerhouses around them. I mean, they've got Valir nearby, they've got SkyPass.
Well,
Off the coast is... What's that?
The devs said that they've been assimilated.
Right, and so, but what does that mean, though, right? I mean, assimilated on one hand, they're not building, temples to Brog that we're aware of. It hasn't been mentioned. They're not converting en masse to a particular worship. They still have a certain respect or even adherence to their native beliefs, or it appears to be so. But at the same time, we know Valir will pick off stragglers of their peoples, and no one seems to stop them for it. And they seem to be the only direct mention I've heard of logging, and that's a major resource. I mean, all our houses in Crown's Rock are made out of lumber. Most of the houses in Valir probably are a combination of stone and timber, right? But I mean, they're a major source of logging, but they're not they don't appear to be a wealthy people. Is that because they're abstaining from that direction of trying to obtain economic wealth, or is it because they are essentially used for it? Yes, you get to maintain your lives this way, but you essentially X amount of your production just gets taken away, and you have no real say over that. I mean, I'm not trying to paint a negative picture. I'm just curious as to, when we say assimilated, what does that really mean for a culture that has kind of stood by and been relatively simple in comparison to these larger, cities that have continued to develop post Synod convention, I guess.
Well, Omwa did actually talk about how he defined assimilation.
Okay.
And the way that he described it was things like the very, very simple kinds of communal living that they had have been modified over time and through the influence of SkyPass and other places to have less dorm-style longhouse living with more private dwellings. So this shift from almost totally communal living to having some individual spaces. It's still sprawling, no central government, no no any kind of governmental structure in that sense, but it has shifted from the longhouse kind of style of living to one where there's individual homes. The logging has become a trade, and it's brought economic resources in. It's given them a way to trade off their excess for other things. So in terms of assimilation, it sounds as though it has begun but not completely taken over.
Right. Well, I
And
mean,
as Snipe said, that's maybe not the best word, assimilate, but
I
I don't know what other word you would use. Certainly influenced.
Yeah, influence.
They've been
makes
influenced.
sense.
I wouldn't think that they would allow their culture to be, taken over and completely rerouted into using the, more synod analogs of the gods, or rejecting the gods that don't conform to any of the synod analogs that they do have. But when it comes to that a word that maybe isn't quite the right word, I'm kind of thinking, things that Skypass would have brought to Fall Creek would have been, here's the language we use, here's the currency we use, and here's just the technology for like the creature comforts and common things that we want to be able to see and have access to when we come to visit and trade and that sort of stuff. So I would imagine that, yeah, the more individualized housing, that's probably something that's coming from Skypass. Well, I mean, you mentioned it definitely is. But other things like, you know, bathrooms and toilety sorts of things, rather than just, I would imagine the locals just have, places they go out and dig up a little hole and use the bathroom and cover it up, and that's just that. You just return it to nature. And maybe that's one of the things that people of Skypass may or may not be down with so much. And then, yeah, language and currency are the two things that I'm really interested in, because obviously they had their own language. It wasn't necessarily a written language. So for them to be able to engage in cultures with a written language, it seems like they would need to, learn and agree upon at least one that they use. And likewise, trade with cultures outside their own. It seems like some sort of established currency would be important. Within their own culture, for some reason, I imagine barter is the biggest driving force, especially, locals just dealing with locals. Either barter, or that there's not necessarily a governmental establishment, but, a few families agree, we take care of the reindeer in the area, and we'll get the milk, and we'll find the ones that are the right to slaughter for meat, and we're the family that deals with that. They're the family that deals with making sure we've got all the kindling and all the firewood that we need to last through the winter. And you've got a few families in just this tiny little micro neighborhood that are self-sufficient together, and so they don't really need currency. It's just we've banded together along these common lines with these common responsibilities. If Joe breaks his ankle, then maybe Jill will come through and help pick up the slack. And they're from two different families, but whatever. They're all working together, and they would all try to do their very best to not only hold up their own end, but making sure their fellow neighbors in this agreement get all the help that they would need. Likewise, this is the sort of thing where they're a very practical culture. It doesn't seem like any amount of freeloading and waiting around doing things is accepted. So, like, sitting reading books, going to watch a play at an opera house, those don't seem like things they do. It seems like the way they get their entertainment is, telling stories and singing songs while they work, while they're doing their practical things. And I'm wondering if that's another thing that maybe has come from Skypass, is less practical ways to, I guess, more individualized ways to be entertained and enjoy, or things where it's, a performance that's specifically for, entertainment. It isn't something cultural. Drinking games, indeed, baby can. That drinking games and fighting due to winning or losing or just playing too much definitely sounds like a big part of their culture. But again, that's a functional thing. People work hard, they want to drink. So drinking isn't necessarily a self-serving luxury or something so much as just like the cultural. This is how we unwind. We go to the place where we go to drink. We play drinking games. We talk. We sing. We fight. That's just what we do. That's just who we are. Boxing, drinking games, darts. Do they do darts? I guess that would if they are. It seems like they would be using
Horn,
bone.
antler.
Yeah,
Yeah.
things because it seems like the metal that they do acquire, like they were saying, is usually used for like tools, and specifically the hard striking part of the tool that you just can't compromise on everything else with. Um, that's a lot of different things that just kind of got covered there about things that could have come from Sky Pass and started influencing Falkirk, and as well the Falkirk, what things that they value, what things that they approve and accept, and what things they would kind of reject, and they'll allow people to come to their area and do those things, but they don't take it on as a major part of their culture. And yeah, that's something they're definitely on. Well, that I was thinking about daggers, axes. Those seem more like their kind of weapons. Sledgehammers and hammers that use a ceramic head or a stone head rather than metal. That definitely seems more like their sort of arsenal. But no, a sword seems like way too much metal for them to use. And it seems like someone who's trading in metal potentially could have a lot of business in
I,
in that area.
I could definitely see them being, really quality, really expert level, kind of carpenters coming from there. As Ombo mentioned, wood joinery saves nails. So they would have mastered dovetails, the mortise and tenon style, your datas, rabbits, all that good stuff. Which would be interesting, though, again, so if they're doing that as a style, those kind of things promote generational furniture, which is something we don't really do these days. Everything we kind of produce, it lasts for the house you're in, and that's it. But these are the kind of things that would stay around for a long time, which, again, would be interesting if that has an influence as time progresses for them. If they, create a kind of exported or export of a business, in that they are fine, furniture makers or carpenters, or they can take their workforce out into the other cities or be called upon to do these expert level works. Definitely could be seen as a sign of the kind of changing times.
I guess what I don't hear enough of in these talks is what of the synod culture is absolutely rejected and outlawed, and so what are the synod forced to adopt in order to participate in these different cultures. So we think about drinking. I don't hear things like dancing or smoking, which might be alternatives. And these might be things that people from the synod pick up and had to pick up because the people in this area or in Valor or in Anacotha rejected what the synod brought.
Yeah, I can definitely agree. There's probably a lot of things that they outright ban. Probably trying to specifically lay permanent claim and ownership to an area. You build your house there, you might own the house, or you and your family might own the house, but I don't think you necessarily own that land. They've definitely talked about the idea that you don't own all the reindeer. You don't have a herd of reindeer. You would have maybe two or three that you specifically take care of and watch over, and maybe help you out getting around or other sorts of things. But you don't own all the reindeer, so that would be something trying to hoard and amass and try to you know build up your worth and your value in this area, or for the purpose of trading export to other areas for your own personal gain, off of the resources that everybody uses, definitely seems entirely forbidden. So a lot of the ability for people outside Fall Creek to engage in business there, I would imagine DNI might have some agents there, and definitely uh, along the tide's end to Fall Creek Path. But in Fall Creek itself, I doubt DNI really has much of any establishment, because it just wouldn't be allowed. It's like, well, we're going
But
to
DNI
stake
doesn't
off the
really
ground here. And
DNI
some...
doesn't really represent the synod though. They're
No,
their own.
no, that's
It's
true. That's true. But I guess they don't represent the synod, but to me they represent something that couldn't exist without the synod.
yeah. People of the synod aren't about conquest; they're about cooperation. So in the case of the Falkirk people, they have had to accept that there is communal ownership and custodianship of the land. Likewise, Falkirk arts and practices, like their drinks or food styles, are spread to other cities for sure.
Yeah.
So kind of across.
Have any of you guys lived in community?
Uh, in a communal living situation, aside
Yeah.
from having a roommate once, no.
That
And having
doesn't
a kid
count.
who is essentially like a lamprey for half her life, no.
Jeez.
Okay, so I've lived in community. I lived in community for a number of years. And it is a different way of life. It is a different way of thinking. And you pretty much lose all sense of personal privacy. And what I see in this description of this culture and this people is that they had their way of life that was truly communal, in the sense of the priority is the health and the life of the community. And, one of the things that they gave up, not even probably thinking too much about it, was personal privacy, personal property, and all that stuff that goes with it. And the introduction of the synod has is introduced or influenced a certain amount of now getting back to personal primacy. And I wonder how the history of the Falkirk people will play out, because what was once purely communal is now somewhat corrupted by ego, and we see a little bit of it over time. We see this influence, but it makes me wonder how Theleston would look in terms of the Falkirk people in 300 years or 400 years.
Yeah, and I think part of it is part of it will always be preserved to an extent, because I feel like there's just things that they do culturally that they would never abandon, they would never give up. For example, they've got kind of like a spiritual animist sort of, and it touches on potentially like some sorts of Native American variation, some amount of Shinto was mentioned. It doesn't seem like we have quite a full concrete understanding of exactly how their religions work, but we understand they have their own gods. And like I was saying, some of them may have analogs that are very similar to the exact same ones as the ones of the synod, just under different names or known by different names. And there's ones that may be completely different than that. They had talked about that the elder gods are the ones that the world came with. There are newer gods that have come on the scene since then, aside from the outer gods, of course. So that's kind of one of the questions is, are there gods more like the new gods, which doesn't mean that they aren't, old and ancient in their own ways. It's just they aren't the ones that Theleston basically came with by default. So, with that, I wonder how much of their culture they're willing to give up, knowing that, if they keep the religion and the spiritual side the way that they do and want to maintain that, it means some things just won't go away. I'm sure the communal lifestyle, the communal living, is part of their faith in the way that they see the world and the relationship between people and nature and land and how that's all managed. And really, unless it was a long term systemic takeover from outsiders, kind of taking over the area in a non-violent way, but trying to further influence the culture and push it this way and that might be the thing that would move it away from the culture that it is right now. But it seems like there's going to be a lot more of it that stays the same in 300 years than would be completely different in 300 years. To me, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I have not heard a lot of support for the ways of these non-synod peoples being impactful. That the reason that their culture exists the way it does is because if it doesn't, the world will go awry. I haven't. It sounds like the synod just comes in and decides, oh, this is the way we do things. It's obviously better than your way, so we'll just convince you of that, and then, slowly but surely we'll take over, and you'll understand that our ways are better.
Well, that's kind of what I was curious about when we started talking about assimilation, or again, for lack of a currently better word, assimilation is what level is that? I mean, on the surface, from everything we've been told so far, the Synod doesn't sound like any kind of malicious group. They don't have an ulterior motive of world domination that we know of, but they do have the goal of unification and progress through that. But one man's unification usually is conquest, or is usually another man's conquest. So I that is a complexity that I'm curious if it exists, if it's being kind of ignored at this stage. And I don't want to use ignored because I know you guys actually really think these things out. But so again, these are just for lack of a better term at the moment. But yeah, I can see that because we have the Falkirk, and for instance, their own name has been kind of misconstrued just by the process of translation and time. And this happens, all throughout, our history, so we know it can happen. But that's often also been on the trail to other things that happen when we start absorbing and assimilating cultures. So I am curious about how that will play out as it goes forward. Because again, good intentions, yes, joint, and it makes sense that people would want to get together and try to uplift everyone. But when you do that, things invariably get left behind, and I'm curious how, because this is probably the most pure to its roots culture we've been introduced to in Theleston, and so they are kind of, to my eye, they're the the test bed or the patient zero to how that amalgamation of culture will, what that effect will be on it. So
yeah. Well,
and again, I'm not necessarily saying that I think that there's some evil organization that's inherently, bad. I don't really believe that's the case. It's just, but that, as I said, depending on where your viewpoint is, that could be a very contentious point of cultural evolution, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it seems like the Synod isn't there to conquer the world. They want to conform the world. They're like, we've seen, the almost entire obliteration of the world and society and everything, and we're trying to do our very best to make sure that doesn't happen again, but we're going to do it in the way that we think, is going to be best. If you join the Synod and, build and gain influence, and we decide that your way is the way that makes the most sense to get the world to, conform in such a way that we can avoid having an end of time situation again, then we'll do that. But otherwise, we're going to do the way that we've been doing things, which is it sounds like mostly like the Bragian and Odensian way, with some other ones definitely are of importance too, but those are the two that seem to come up the most and seem to be the most active elements in this, attempt to kind of conform the cultures of the world. That doesn't mean that there aren't aspects of what they've done that could look like conquest. Obviously, Congarai, it doesn't seem like the Garavi are really too happy about that. So,
Yeah, I think it's problematic to assume that just because you are not using military might to conquer a culture, that uh, uh, whatever way you're able to pressure those people to conform, because it's usually doesn't. I mean, often it does not happen that way. Um, you know, you might present your vision of what's better, and those people will say, yeah, and you might be able to do that. You might even be able to do that on that little piece of our land, but we're going to do things our way. And I just haven't seen or heard a lot of pushback of this is the way we do things. We need to do things this way because our way is actually best. I haven't heard a lot of that.
And I haven't actually heard that either. I mean, I don't get the impression that at least the original intent, was to go out and shape the world. I got the impression that it was to go out and find the other people that were alive and see if there wasn't a way to keep the world from completely and utterly collapsing and killing off all the rest of them, if they could figure out a way to work together. Now, granted, human beings being what they are, yeah, there's competitors, there's winners, there's losers, there's judgment and bias and all that crap that we do. But somewhere in there, here we are 600 years later, 684, and, it makes me wonder what kind of shape these cultures are in. I like the way Zero described the Falkirk people as down to their roots still pretty pure. And yet they've resisted some things, but not others. It just raises a lot of questions for me in terms of where will these people be?
Yeah, it's kind of a... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to go ahead, and then there's a few things from chat that I definitely want to bring up here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one thing I was going to say is it's a large amount of time, and that becomes kind of hard to wrestle with because, being a mere mortal until I'm proven otherwise, 600, 500, 600, 700 years, that's a large amount of time, and a lot can happen in that. But at the same time, if we go from essentially the collapse of I shouldn't say civilization, because I don't want to be disrespectful, because there is civilization, there is culture and things like that, regardless of the state of the world. But the collapse of previous, kind of civilization, and then the synods kind of push to try to restore that. It's still a relatively short period of time for a essentially global effort for as much of the globe as they know. So it's still pretty early on in that, and I'm like I said, this is more kind of a theory crafting of future sort. Right now, I don't see that there's a lot of inherent negativity or a push to force societies to conform to them. But at the same time, I think that's going to have to happen at some point. Realistically, there's got to be some pushback that develops because, for instance, as young people say, just like we see now, young people, I don't want to stay in my old town anymore. I'm going to move out. I'm not going to work on the family farm. I'm going to go do these things. That is inherently, a breaking point in culture and how things happen. So, will that create some pushback? I think it would. I don't know that now is, at 679 years or what have you, is that soon enough that, or have they become large enough that that's become an issue? I don't know. But anyways, I'm kind of losing my point here, but it's just I suspect that's kind of an inevitability, just because for all the good intentions of it, as you try to organize you naturally want to categorize, you naturally want to force things to conform into specific categories, and that does push away a lot of cultural roots, whether they mean to or not. So, but at the same time, it's still so early into this kind of organized sense of rebuilding, and that I don't think. I guess I should say I'm maybe not surprised there isn't a lot of, or I'm not surprised there isn't more pushback on it, as Diggs just mentioned. But we're also looking at this from a 10,000-foot kind of microcosm of the world. We don't know a lot of the details yet, and if we dug down into individual, NPC lives, there very well could be a lot of animosity towards that. So I don't know. It's just kind of it is a point that I am actually intrigued by, and I do watch. So I'm kind of curious to see, as we learn more about this world, what the depth of that influence has been.
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing about the synod that I don't know if atheist is necessarily the right word. They're definitely more theist. They definitely seem like they prefer the presence and the use of the gods they use. And now there's a couple of things from chat here I wanted to bring up. Sniper earlier was saying there's probably things they know or they don't know, or even don't know that they know. Like, gods are similar beings that lived in those wilds. How to appease them, etc. It might be nothing more than, well, of course you put out milk at night. Don't be stupid. Not realizing that the old myth that spark the practice isn't a myth, but a warning, or something that actually has some mechanical, measurable component to it.
Right, and so I want to stop there for a second, because the way that is spun makes it sound like these people are ignorant, whereas it should be spun as they know. The Synod people might not know, because that's not the way it works where they're from. But it can't be that they don't know. It sounds like they know. Yeah. That's why they're doing it.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that there is a likely chance that they do, in fact, know at some level, but I would imagine it might be something that more like the elders and the more like people who have been around for a while that that have heard more of the stories, that have heard some of the more obscure stories, some of the stuff that the verbal the oral storytelling tradition kind of helps with that. Maybe you can't just look in a book about like the history of this specific practice, but if you listen to all the stories from all the storytellers, you'll be able to understand, oh, we put out milk at night because such and such being or whatever made a decree, or this was their way of making sure that everybody all works together, that everybody has to do this thing. It's like a communal ritual or whatever, and that's how it decides it wants to keep protecting them. There might be a meaning that they know, but it's not necessarily like, ask any old kid that young 15-year-old or whatever lumberjack, like, hey, why do we put milk out at night? And it's like, well, I don't know. That's just what we do.
I don't know. I guess I could. I think, and I know I'm being a little bit nitpicky here. I really do. But that may. Yeah, okay, this is going to sound kind of mean, because obviously it's coming from the devs, but that may just be a bad example, because that's a tradition that I can't see continuing just out of superstition, just out of, just out of, the kind of, well, yeah, you just do it because that's what we've always done. I mean, that if there's an actual historical precedent in their past that, something bad will actually happen for not doing it, that's one that I would see, I agree, they would know about that one, because, the other family didn't do it last night, and they suffered terribly for it, or whatever it be. That's just nitpicking at that particular example. And I know I'm being picky about it, just because that sounds like one that would have enough of a negative benefit, and for it to have continued that long, that there has to be an actual well observed reason for it. And again, though, maybe not recently, so I could see how it gets a little bit lost to tradition, but it's just that particular one is specific enough that I don't know that I'd want to that they wouldn't be aware as to why they're doing it, just because it's a commodity resource that they need. So putting it out every night,
I
just
guess
for
what
the
I
sake of
what I'm
tradition.
saying is when I hear these uh, the lore spun, it's always from a position of these other people don't know, but the synod does know. Their traditions are being lost, but and overtaken by the synod. That's the way I hear the lore continuously spun. Not these people know, and you should listen to them because they know. And the synod might think they know, but in this particular case, they actually don't know. I never hear that.
Maybe the academic side of the synod is partially why that's the spin, and they might be the ones that are even writing the perspective of history that we're seeing in many ways. But it's the sort of thing where if you look at cultures of this real world here that we the hosts of the show live in, people believe a lot of things, and some of them are with purpose and some of them aren't. But we don't have like gods we can die and visit and interact with and then come back to life and tell everyone about. So it's not something we can do in a tangible, measured way. Now, in this world, these spirits do exist. These gods do exist. These supernatural events do occur. So, it might not be necessarily, again, that they don't know so much as the amount of time it would take to specifically explain why you put your milk out, could be a hell of a long damn story, or a series of long damn stories that, if you aren't paying full attention the entire time, the entire message could be lost. It's like, well, I still don't know about what to do with the milk. But it's that there's definitely things that cause and effect that occurs due to supernatural beings and their existence and things that they like and desire and want to see done. So it might be them talking to an outsider who asks, oh, well, that's just our culture, that's just why we do it. But they actually do know why these things happen. But yeah, I definitely I see your frustration there, Diggs, and I can definitely understand it. All right, so we got a lot of stuff that's come through chat here in a little bit. I'm just gonna kind of
Yeah, I'm reading.
yeah. Synod doesn't know what it doesn't know. It is dangerous that this happens. That's a piece of what puts the Synod peace at risk in a way. The seed for some adventures will, without doubt, be sown in the way the success of the Reconstruction overwrote critical knowledge of the past. That's kind of an important detail. I mean, there's a lot of. I'm going to have to go back through and read chat again on this one because there's a lot of good stuff we've been talking about. One of the other things that came up earlier that I wanted to mention was I feel like the question isn't really is the synod bad so much as how can such a movement resist the seemingly inevitable transition into an empire. Um, and the following statement or whatever that DNI, for example, isn't the synod, but when they come to show up and start gritting out land used to graze your cattle on, do you feel that way? Are you cursing the synod and its arrogance? The problem with the synod's core foundation principle is that it blinds the synod and activists to the idea that some folks may have gotten through the bad times just fine, but don't need to band together to keep the shadows at bay. And that definitely sounds like it's the case with
Yeah.
Fall Creek. That we know Tide's End has pretty much always had somebody there. they didn't specifically say that with Fall Creek, but I would imagine there's always been people living there, as long as people have known about it and been living there. It sounds like it's just an amazing ecosystem. You've got wildlife, you've got clean water, you've got, weather that's easy to live in. You've got obviously tons of food and stuff to forage that you don't even need to farm. Um, so they seem like they could live and exist fully self sufficiently. That the entire rest of the world could very well just go to shit around them, and they'd be just fine. I would imagine
Well, right.
some of
So
the trade with Tides End. There's some benefits and stuff they get from that they would definitely be missing out on. But if things were going that bad in the world, I would imagine a lot of people from Tides End would make their way up the river and up the mountain and say, "Hey, we throw ourselves upon your mercy. Take us in. We'd rather be with you than down there."
right, is there a reason that uh, mining didn't happen to the degree that it does now? I mean, what I'm saying is the way as it's spun is that there isn't, but there.
A
I
little
don't
bit.
I don't hear enough the way the lore is spun of, um, oh yeah, we. It's not that we were too stupid to do mining, and we needed to wait for SkyPass people to come in and teach us mining. We don't mine because mining is problematic, and we've learned that doing this mining is problematic. So we don't mine here, even though we have a rich place to mine from.
Right.
Don't disturb what's going over there.
Well,
I just don't hear enough of that in the lore. Is what
they
I'm saying.
did mention when I brought it up on the show on episode 25 of the Fireside, that when I brought up about like rare minerals and gems and even gas that might vent out, that it might be something that gets approached at some point. But a lot of the mining that occurs, there is mining that occurs a bit, but it's more at the base of the mountain. And I'm wondering if maybe that's where more of the natural areas to go in and find, veins and ore and just loose materials and stuff is at, if they, pan for materials at all, or, or if it's just more like, outcroppings on the outside of the mountain. They might have some bad juju about like going inside of a cave to mine. Maybe it's bad things have happened enough times that it's just like, no, not for us. If you guys want to go and do that, like we might lull you and we might prevent you, but for our own uses or whatever, when we need metal for, in the past before we started trading with Skypass and Tides End, if we needed metal for making a dagger or a tapper or a good quality axe, that I would imagine would have been the operations going towards the base of the mountain, more than anything else. It certainly seems like the higher parts of Cloudspite Mountain are specifically for the neighborhoods and the culture that exists there and the religious observations that they have, but not necessarily for mining or heavy industry. I mean, heavy industry in general is something that seems like they avoid. Just to have a someone who's enough of a metallurgist and enough of a metal worker that they can identify materials, get the actual ore in a state that you can use it, and then actually use it and provide the tools that are needed. It seems like that would be a smaller niche sort of thing in the culture rather than something that a lot of people know how to do and aspire to do. Now that
The
being,
basis
go ahead.
If the basis and the original purpose of the Synod visiting these various places when they came out from Skypass was to establish or reestablish old trade routes that had gone to shit because of the fall, then things like mining and metal, if you didn't know how to process it and all that stuff, you wouldn't even care. You'd be much more concerned about, well, I have an excess of hides or meat or berries or whatever it is that actually is used by my culture. And I could trade that for those pieces of metal over there that would be really handy. But other than that, I mean, I'm not sure that there'd be much need for things like mining and ore, especially if you don't know how to do it.
Yeah, and again, it sounds like since they do almost everything with wood, going and getting metal and getting stone and building things out of stone, it just doesn't seem like it's part of their culture. And if the mining stuff is going towards the base of the mountain, I could definitely see barges that meet up with the mining operations and ship slabs of nice stone and stuff to Tide's End, so it can be further broken down into other things or used for stuff. But it seems like part of it is that they might just actually respect the natural state of things in such a way that they just don't want to open up mining because they don't want the mountain to be destroyed. They don't want part of it to get excavated just for the purpose of materials, because again, they don't use a lot of metal. If somebody does that and sets up shop, they might see that as, well, someone wants to create their metal empire off the base of our mountain. We don't want to allow that. So that's definitely an interesting one. And then I also wonder about how many of their tools they would use metal for, but can just get away with stone. Maybe there's some really, really, really hard-ass stone that's really, really durable out there, and that might even make it hard to mine to begin with. But maybe they can make lumber working tools and stuff like that just with stone. I mean, if we're talking about a dagger, for example, not necessarily a tapper for making a channel in a tree, but just something you need to be able to protect yourself. You need to be able to stab one of those Veiler slavers if they try to jump on you or whatever. You're out hunting, you've put an arrow in something and you want to finish it off clean and safely. I would imagine someone could get by with a dagger made of stone rather than needing metal for that. So, their actual need for metal even seems like it's very, very minimal to begin with.
Well, if you can make some pretty nifty and very sharp daggers out of horn and antler,
Yeah,
you don't need metal.
that's true.
I mean, you got a workaround. So, yeah, I think it's interesting. It raises a lot of questions. This is all new territory for us as witnesses and players. This is the first we've heard of the Falkirk people in any kind of detail, and it raises a lot of questions. They all have different interests and stuff, but it raises a lot of questions for all of us about how's this going to play out.
Yeah. So one of the aspects of their culture that I thought was interesting, just kind of taking a little bit of a different turn here, is the idea that their writing isn't necessarily, letters written horizontally or vertically, or symbols which represent words in a very specific way. That might be a little bit closer to what it is, but it sounds like it's using images as well as color, and I would imagine the context for the relationship for how they're rendered is a lot of how their storytelling, a lot of their visual communication works. That I have a harder time seeing somebody handing out pamphlets so much as small flat round stones that have a little story kind of drawn on it, whether it's like a cautionary tale or it's like, oh, I found this new way to hunt this certain animal that we hunt or whatever, and they're distributing those. It would still communicate essentially what they needed to communicate, especially if the combination of images and color is so well understood in the culture that it might even be more efficient than communicating with a common written language. And the way that also plays out, since they have a lot of totems and a lot of outdoor places of worship, rather than having established like houses and structures where they do their worship. I would imagine the symbols and the paint and the quality of its application is definitely important to that. That you'll see you'll see a totem of some sort out in a meadow, and if you're just an outsider and you don't know anything about the culture and the way they communicate, it just looks cool. But if you do know, you'll go and be like, oh, so this was the site where this specific thing happened, and who was involved, and the when and the why and the how and all of that, which could also end up actually almost being a way of their own, like, cryptic encoding, that they could be anywhere in the world, and it's like, well, just so long as I've got a blue, yellow, and red pigment and some way to apply it to some surface, I can essentially communicate in secret messages. I could even see, like, armies with heraldry or whatever. Maybe they wouldn't necessarily get to that point, but maybe actually, if they were on the coast, I would see maybe their ships and their sails and the way that they approach the art style for those. So you could visualize, you could visually identify immediately, oh hey, they're such and such family from Fall Creek, or even recognizing, oh hey, they're probably from Fall Creek.
Right. And so when I was listening to the show, or this episode 25, I heard the devs talk about how you might go into a Falkirk person might go into a restaurant and not be able to order from the menu because they can't read the menu. What I didn't hear was the flip side of how somebody might go to an area with a totem, and there's a whole story on the totem telling people what they should and should not do. But if you can't read the totem, you don't know. I don't see this flip side of these other cultures being knowledgeable in a way that gives them an advantage that other people won't have. I always hear it from the perspective of the people from Sky Pass or the people from Crown's Rock, have this advantage, and these other poor people who were nomads, oh well, they just kind of are.
Well, also the example that you
have
gave,
a disadvantage because they have a disadvantage because they aren't as civilized as the people from Sky Pass. That's the way I keep hearing the lore being spun.
well, one of the examples that I know Verde had brought up was from Samurai Champloo, that one of the characters is literate and orders off the menu. The other one is totally illiterate, and so he just orders the same thing. But I don't think that's necessarily how the Falkirk would do it. I think if they showed up in a town that they haven't been to before, they would ask, like, hey, can you cook me some salted poultry in hot searing oil? And that might be a specific dish that exists, or it might just be, well, you're asking the chef if they can make this thing for you, and either they can or they can't. And so to that extent, I don't think they necessarily need menus, and I wonder if they even use them in their culture.
Yeah, and in one of my stories on Crown's Rock Chronicles, I think I have a character who's using hobo code on restaurant buildings and stuff. So, again, it wouldn't have to be a fully written language. It could be symbols. And two, for all we know, it's not necessarily happening in Falkirk, but in Fall Creek. But I would imagine there are people who might do the same thing. I don't know what's on that menu. I can't read that menu, but I can tell other people from my culture what you can get there by leaving symbols that other people might even overlook because they don't realize that it's sending a message.
Oh, sorry, go continue, please. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I was just saying, I don't hear in the lore. For me, I just don't hear a lot of spin that uplifts this other culture. It always seems to be placing the Skypass descendants as more civilized and more educated and more knowledgeable than the nomads or the natives.
And
So this might be. Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say a little bit of what that reminds me of is, you look at the gods must be crazy. It's like, well, who's really the more civilized ones, the Bushmen or the Kalahari
Exactly.
who take care of themselves, or us like crazy savages with our cars and our wars and stuff?
Well, this might be just a good perspective challenge then for our Skyward devs, and as you like start planning out your next stories, for instance, it might be interesting then to see one that is from because we get some great stories of coming out of Crowns Rock inhabitant perspectives, player perspectives, like the old day in the lives and the like. So this might be a good opportunity then for us to see one from uh, Falkirk's perspective, or from a true Garavi inhabitant perspective, someone who's just be a good story that way, because I think that's where this some of this is coming from. It's just that the perspectives we are getting from are coming, as Dick said, from Skypass, from the Crowns Rock inhabitants. So they have, or from the player perspective, as I often view it, which would be I only know kind of what I've been introduced to as a player, and that's going to be kind of a very narrow view set. So it could be a good opportunity for one of your stories to really push out some cultural perspective pieces.
Yeah.
So I just want to throw, while there's a silence, and talking about what we're going to hear from the devs. Yeah, we're a little past time anyway. Because we're supposed to have the devs on next week, right?
Yeah, we're gonna talk about the
Oh, well,
synod,
that'd be great too. Even better.
because that's something that we should know a lot more about, and I feel like we don't. And there's a lot to know, there's a lot to learn, there's a lot to understand, and I don't think an hour is gonna be enough, but we'll
agree.
see what we can cover in
We
that
could do
time.
longer.
Hell yeah.
I mean, I'm up for doing longer.
I'm down.
It's a special show in a couple of ways, but especially when we have devs on, it's because we can have a whole show just with ourselves. We'll take up an hour and could take up more probably.
Well, anytime
yeah,
we're lucky
so
enough, to get them is time to pump them for everything we can, right?
Right. Absolutely.
we all up for trying for 2 hours next week?
Sure, I can
Sure.
definitely do it. As
Okay.
long as the power doesn't go out like it did this morning. It's like, oh no, that's gonna be terrible for the show. But it's not even a hot day either. It's like no air conditioner on or anything. It's like, nope, power just wants to say fuck it.
Yeah, what month is this? This is October? I thought we were gonna get a pretty big hit from that hurricane or whatever that was supposed to come through Seattle, and we got one day of rain.
Yeah. One whole
And
day.
not even crazy rain, but it actually did rain. So
Yeah.
that's our storm. Our major storm is it actually rained in LA.
Once. No, not
Well,
again
it finally
till
snowed
like
here, but that's about
mid-November.
it.
But it's hot. It feels like July right now, or this past week.
Yeah, we're having Indian summer here. It was almost 80 yesterday.
Yeah.
Fun.
Well, I'm looking outside the snow, so screw all you.
Well, on that note, then let's wrap it up. If anybody had any last things you want to say, shout it out now. Otherwise, no.
I will say if Hero's Song comes out on Friday, I
Yes.
think Ombla, and maybe that could be our weekend play, and I might even try and
Yeah.
jump in on that. But
Cool.
Hero's Song is supposed to be coming out this Friday is what they're shooting for, so hopefully sometime during the weekend, and I think Ombwa and Snipe Hunter were planning to play. We should figure out, if we can get into a multiplayer game, that would be fun.
Yeah.
I will be playing it for sure as well.
And me too.
Or at least as time allows. It comes back this weekend, which is always great, but demanding.
Yeah. Yeah, that should be a lot of fun. So I guess we'll figure that out, and we might have a little bit of that to talk about on the next show too. So that being the case, looks like this is a good time to wrap up. Thank you all very much for coming. Zero, Diggs, Pole, it's always great to have you folks on and always be able to talk about this stuff with you. Snipe, Ombois, and Verde, always great seeing you guys in chat. Baby Cannon holding the band hammer there, much appreciated. And all the rest of you folks, always appreciated. Thank you all very much. We will see you next weekend instead of waiting 2 weeks, so make sure you come back on the 5th Sunday of the month. Till then, bye-bye.
The 30th, yep.